Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Conway. I'm 34 years old. My father evacuated the whole family before a Category 4 storm, watched my mother drive off in the last car, boarded my kitchen window from the outside, and left me locked inside the house with 3 dogs and 2 cats. And by 7:30 the next morning, my phone was exploding with 53 missed calls and a text from him that said, "Please stop." The thing about betrayal is that sometimes it does not arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrives with plywood, a cordless drill, and your father acting like he is being practical. The storm had been on the news for 3 days. Every weather app on Earth was glowing red. Schools were closed. Grocery shelves were stripped. Gas lines curled around blocks. The governor was on television using that serious, calm voice people use when they want panic to sound organized. Evacuate if you can. Leave early. Do not wait. My family waited anyway. That was my father's way. He liked danger best when it gave him a chance to act like the only reasonable man in the room. He spent all Thursday barking orders, taping windows, dragging patio furniture into the garage, and talking over every meteorologist as if the storm might change direction out of respect. My mother followed behind him, wringing her hands and pretending helplessness in the expensive, polished way she had perfected over the years. My younger brother, Mark, loaded coolers into the SUV, complained about traffic, and still somehow found time to tell me I was lucky I did not have kids to move. My sister Jenna kept shoving cosmetics and chargers into tote bags while asking if the rental house inland would still have Wi-Fi. And me? I was carrying pet food, water jugs, flashlights, litter, towels, and crates, because in my family, if something was unpleasant but necessary, it usually rolled downhill until it hit me. That had been true my whole life. Rachel can stay late. Rachel can clean it up. Rachel will understand. Rachel is stronger. Rachel is practical. Rachel does not need as much. Useful daughters hear those sentences so often, they almost mistake them for compliments. By late afternoon, the first bands of rain were already lashing the porch screens, and the wind had started making that deep, ugly sound in the trees that tells you nature is done negotiating. The real evacuation should have happened hours earlier. We all knew it, but my father had mismanaged time the way he mismanaged everything else, with confidence loud enough to pass for authority. Then came the pets. 3 dogs, 2 cats, all terrified already. My mother stood in the kitchen staring at the carriers like they had personally offended her. We can't possibly fit all of them. Mark said the beach house we were supposedly evacuating to did not allow animals. Jenna said one of the dogs shed too much and the cats would destroy the furniture. I looked at my father and knew, even before he opened his mouth, exactly where the conversation was heading. He wiped rain off his forearm and said, "Someone has to stay with the house. Not someone has to stay with the pets. Not we need a plan. The house." The pets were just the excuse. I said, "No." It came out faster than I expected, sharp enough to make the room still for half a second. My mother turned toward me with immediate offense, as if refusal itself were rude. "Rachel, don't start." "Don't start?" I looked at all of them. "You are not leaving me here in a hurricane." My father's face changed then, harder, flatter. The expression that meant he had already decided something and was now offended by resistance. "It's one night," he said. "The house needs watching, and the animals can't be left alone." "Then one of you stay too." No one answered. That was answer enough. Jenna looked down at her phone. Mark suddenly became fascinated by the cooler straps. My mother pressed her lips together in that injured little line she used whenever she wanted my guilt to do the work for her. Finally, she said softly, "You know your father can't handle the stress here, and Mark has the driving. We need everyone in the cars." Everyone. I was standing right there and she still said everyone. I laughed once because if I had not, I might have screamed. My father stepped closer. "Stop being dramatic. You've always been good in a crisis." There it was again. The family version of love I had been fed my whole life. You're capable. You're steady. You can take it. Which usually meant, we are about to hand you something cruel and call it trust. I said no again, clearer this time. He did not argue after that. That should have scared me sooner. Instead, he just nodded once, walked outside into the rain, and came back carrying a sheet of plywood and the drill. At first, I thought he was going to secure the side window. Then I realized he was moving toward the kitchen, toward me, toward the only big window near the back door. "What are you doing?" I asked. "So you don't get stupid ideas and run out halfway through the night," he said. My mother picked up her purse. Mark carried out the last bag. Jenna grabbed the car keys, and I stood there with the dogs whining around my legs and the cats crouched low under the table while my father bolted plywood over the window from the outside like I was not his daughter, but a problem he needed contained until morning. Then he came back in once more, crossed the kitchen, and pulled the breaker for half the first floor. The lights died. The refrigerator hummed down. The house fell into that sudden dead darkness that makes your own breathing sound too loud. He looked at me and said, "Someone has to watch the house." Then he walked out. The front door slammed so hard the glass in the hallway frame rattled. Then came the sound of car doors, voices through rain, an engine turning over, another one behind it, and then nothing except wind. I stood in that dead kitchen with the breaker off, the plywood over the window, and 5 terrified animals crowded around my legs while the storm pressed itself against the house like it had been waiting all day to be let in. For maybe 10 seconds, I did not move. That was shock, I think, not fear yet. Shock has a frozen quality to it, like your mind is still trying to negotiate with a reality your body already understands. Then one of the dogs, Rosie, the oldest, a lab mix with more gray than black in her face now, started shaking so hard her tags clicked against the tile. That snapped me out of it. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer by the stove, found the emergency lantern under the sink, and got all the animals into the kitchen because it was the most interior room in the house and the only one without big exterior glass besides the downstairs bathroom. The power was out on half the first floor, but the outlets on the far wall still worked. So I charged my phone, filled every bowl and pot I could find with water, dragged the dog beds into the kitchen, dumped dry food into mixing bowls, and piled towels by the door in case the roof or one of the windows gave up before midnight. The practical part of me kicked in fast. That part always did. It was the same part my family had used for years and called strength. I hated that they were right about one thing. I was good in a crisis. I just hated more that they used that truth like a leash. By 7, the wind was hitting the siding in long, violent bursts. Not steady, not natural feeling. It came in waves, each one sounding like something enormous, running its hands down the walls trying to find a way in. The house moaned in places I had never noticed before. Floorboards answered each other. Vents whistled. Once something heavy scraped across the back deck, and every animal in the room jumped at once. I texted my mother. He locked me in. Read. No reply. I texted my father. If anything happens here, it's on you. Delivered. No reply. Then I did something I should have done before they pulled out of the driveway. I started recording. First the kitchen window with the plywood bolted over it from outside, then the breaker panel with half the first floor shut down, then the back door lock and the side latch my father had slid from outside before leaving. He had not trusted just the bolt. He wanted me contained. I filmed everything in silence, the beam of the flashlight jumping slightly because even with all my anger, my hand was still shaking. At 7:38, I posted the first video. Not publicly, not yet. I sent it to the family group chat. Dad boarded the window from outside and left me here with the animals during a hurricane. My brother Mark viewed it immediately. Jenna, 2 minutes later. My mother after that. No one answered. That part was almost impressive. You could hand my family proof with the rain still hitting it, and they would still wait to see whether silence might be enough. I posted the second video to my close friend's story. Not dramatic, just factual. Kitchen, plywood, wind, dogs shaking. Caption: my family evacuated and locked me in with the pets. If this house loses signal, this is why. Then I set my phone down and focused on keeping everything alive. By 9, water was starting to push under the mudroom door. By 9:15, one of the cats had wedged herself behind the trash can and refused to come out. By 9:40, the gutter over the back porch ripped loose with a sound so loud I ducked on instinct, and the lantern tipped sideways across the floor. At 10, my father finally texted, "Stop with the dramatics and stay away from the windows." I stared at that message until the screen dimmed. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "How bad is it?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just an irritated command from somewhere inland and dry. I typed back, "Come get me." He did not answer. At 10:30, I heard glass break upstairs, not shatter everywhere. One hard crack and then the weird clatter of fragments sliding somewhere they should not be. I took the flashlight, left the animals in the kitchen behind the baby gate, and went up alone because there was no one else to send. The break was in my old room. Of course it was. The same room I had slept in until 32, because every time I tried to save enough to leave for good, someone in that house had a crisis that couldn't wait. The top pane of the side window had cracked inward. Rain was spraying through in cold bursts, soaking the curtain and the wall beneath it. I shoved towels against the frame, dragged the dresser sideways to brace it, and that was when I noticed the closet door was open. Not wide, just enough. Inside, on the top shelf, there was a black metal lockbox I had never seen before. I almost ignored it. That would have been smarter. But I was wet, furious, trapped, and 20 years of living in my father's house had taught me one reliable thing. Whatever he kept hidden was usually more important than whatever he said out loud. I dragged over a chair, pulled the box down, and nearly dropped it because it was heavier than it looked. Not full of papers, full of something else. I carried it downstairs and set it on the kitchen table, just as another blast of wind hit the house hard enough to make the lantern flicker. The dog started barking. My phone lit up. Not my family this time. My first video had been screen recorded and shared. 3 friends, then 7, then 12 messages, and in the middle of them, one from my cousin Elise, who almost never involved herself in our family disasters. "Rachel, why are people saying Uncle Tom left you in the house alone?" I looked at the lockbox, then at the phone, then back at the storm hitting the walls, and for the first time that night, I had the feeling the morning panic wasn't just going to be about me surviving it. I found the key taped under the bottom of the lockbox. Of course I did. My father never trusted banks, passwords, or anything that left a record. He trusted hiding places, intimidation, and the assumption that no one in the house would ever feel entitled to touch what he considered his. The key was cold and tiny between my fingers. For 1 second, I just stared at it. Then the wind hit the house hard enough to make the back door jump in its frame. Rosie started barking again, and I shoved the key in. The lid opened with a metallic click. Inside were 3 things: a thick stack of papers bound with a black clip, a ring of labeled keys, and a handwritten envelope with my name on it. Not my father's handwriting, my grandmother's. That stopped me. My grandmother, Nora, had been dead almost 2 years. She was my father's mother, which meant he spent most of her funeral performing grief and the next 6 months calling her confused anytime anybody mentioned anything she had ever promised in plain English. She was also the only adult in that family who ever looked at me like I was a person instead of a function. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the envelope first. The paper inside was folded twice. Her handwriting was shaky, but still unmistakably hers. Rachel. If you are reading this, then your father has done something desperate, dishonest, or both. I read that line twice. Then I kept going. She wrote that after my grandfather died, she had changed the paperwork on the house because she no longer trusted my father with anything that could be borrowed against. Lied. about or used to teach a lesson. She wrote that my parents were allowed to stay there only because she thought, maybe foolishly, that keeping a roof over the family mattered more than fairness while she was alive. Then came the sentence that made my hands start shaking for a completely different reason. The house was never left to your father. It was placed in your name with possession delayed until you were ready to use it, because I knew one day he would mistake your patience for ownership. I stared at the page, then at the clipped stack beside it, then back at the page. The dogs had gone quiet. Even the storm seemed to pull back for one strange second, like the whole night was waiting to see whether I understood what had just landed in my lap. The stack of papers was exactly what I thought it was. Deed copy, recorded transfer, property tax file, a letter from Grandma's attorney, and on top, one page highlighted in yellow with a note in her handwriting across the margin. If he ever endangers you in this house, it ends. I actually stopped breathing for a second because the sentence was not sentimental, it was instruction. I read the attorney letter next. Grandma had transferred the property into a life-use arrangement years earlier. My parents could live there, maintain it, and benefit from it only as long as they did not damage the property, encumber it, or use the house to endanger, exclude, or retaliate against me. If they did, occupancy rights could be terminated. My father had boarded me inside a storm and left in the last car, in my house. My phone buzzed so hard it rattled against the table. Cousin Elise again. Rachel, answer me. Uncle Tom is losing his mind. Aunt Sharon shared your story and people are tagging Mom's church group. What is going on? I looked up at the plywood over the window, at the bowls of water, at the cats under the table, at the envelope in my grandmother's hand telling me she had already seen the ending before any of us arrived there. Then I texted Elise back. He locked me inside the house during the evacuation. Also, according to Grandma's papers, the house is mine. The typing bubble came up instantly, stopped, started again. Then, oh my God. That was when I opened the Photos app and took clean, flat pictures of everything. The letter, the deed page, the highlighted instruction. Then I made one post. Not to friends only this time, full public, just the facts. Photo of the boarded kitchen window, photo of Grandma's letter, photo of the deed page. Caption, my father evacuated everyone before the storm, locked me inside this house with the pets, and left. According to the property papers my grandmother left for me, this house was never his to use that way. If anything happens tonight, this is the record. I hit post. The room stayed silent for maybe 15 seconds. Then my phone lit up like someone had plugged it into a wall of panic. Dad, Mom, Mark, Jenna, Aunt Sharon, 3 cousins, 2 neighbors, someone from my father's church, and then the first text from him. Not "Are you safe?" Not "I'm coming back." Not even "Take that down." Just "Delete that now." I looked at it, then at the house around me, then at the rain driving itself against windows that had belonged to me all along. And for the first time that night, I smiled, not because anything was okay, because by morning, none of them were coming back to the same arrangement they had left behind. I did not sleep, not really. I sat on the kitchen floor with Rosie's head in my lap, one cat pressed against my hip, the other hidden behind the microwave, and my phone lighting up every few seconds like the storm had gotten into the wiring. Dad called 11 times in the next hour. Mom left 4 voicemails. Jenna sent, "Please delete that. People are overreacting." Mark sent, "You made this way bigger than it was." That one actually made me laugh, because men like my brother always call something bigger than it was when the consequences finally grow large enough to include them too. Around 1 a.m, the message tone changed. Not family, neighbors, church people. A woman from my mother's Bible group asking if I was safe. Mr. Henley from 2 houses down saying he had seen my post and tried to drive back through, but the county had already blocked the road with floodwater. Then my Aunt Sharon called. Not texted, called. That mattered because Aunt Sharon had spent 20 years surviving my father by agreeing with him quickly and from a safe distance. If she was calling in the middle of a hurricane, the story had gotten loose in a way he could not stuff back into the walls. I answered on the third ring. "Rachel," she said, breathless. "Is it true?" "Yes." A pause. Then quietly, "He said you volunteered." I looked at the boarded window and actually closed my eyes. Of course he had. Even in the middle of a storm, with me inside the house and the whole family somewhere dry, my father's first instinct had been narrative control. "No," I said. "He boarded the kitchen window from outside, cut half the downstairs power, slid the exterior latch, and left." She went silent for a second. Then, "Your grandmother's lawyer is trying to reach you." That cut through everything. I sat up straighter. "What?" "He saw the post. Sharon Miller sent it to him because she remembered your grandmother talking about some kind of property arrangement years ago. He wants you to call him as soon as you can." The lawyer's number was in the packet. I found it with shaking hands and called immediately. He answered like a man who had already been awake too long. "Rachel, this is Thomas Bell, your grandmother's attorney." "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Are you physically safe right now?" "As safe as I can be with a hurricane hitting the house." He exhaled slowly. "Listen carefully. I reviewed the file after seeing your post. If your father knowingly left you confined in that house during an evacuation, he has very likely triggered the occupancy clause your grandmother insisted on. I need you to document everything and do not let him remove those papers." Triggered. That word landed like a second storm front, because until then, part of me had still been moving in survival mode. Get through the night. Keep the animals calm. Keep the roof on. Keep breathing. Now there was something else, an edge, a consequence already taking shape while the wind was still beating the siding. He told me to keep my phone charged, back up every photo, and call emergency services if the structure worsened. Then he said something that stayed with me for the rest of the night. "Rachel, your grandmother built that clause for exactly one reason. She believed your father would eventually confuse staying in the house with owning the people inside it." By 4:30, the worst of the storm had shifted north, not gone, but less violent. The house still trembled in gusts, and there was water under the mudroom door and a crack spreading along the upstairs hall ceiling, but dawn had started turning the edges of the plywood gray. At 6:07, my phone exploded all at once, not gradually, all at once. Missed calls stacked so fast the screen lagged. Mom, Dad, Jenna, Mark. Unknown numbers. Voicemails arriving before the ringtone finished. By 7:30, there were 53 missed calls, and at the top of them, a text from my father. "Please stop," I stared at it. That was all. Not "please answer," not "please tell me you're safe," not "please forgive me," just "please stop." As if the real emergency was not the night he had left me in. As if the disaster was that the wrong people now knew. I typed back exactly one sentence. "Stop what?" "Telling the truth?" He called instantly. I answered this time and put him on speaker. His voice was raw, furious, panicked in a way I had never heard before. "You need to take that post down right now." "Why?" "You are humiliating this family." I looked around the kitchen, at the dogs asleep in anxious little heaps, at the overturned water bowl, at the flashlight, the towels, the black box, my grandmother's letter, and I said, "No, Dad. You humiliated this family when you left your daughter locked inside a hurricane." He started talking over me. Fast now. "People are calling. Your mother's church, the neighbors, Mark's boss saw it, and Belle called me this morning." There it was, the real panic. Not the storm, not me. Belle, the lawyer. I stood up slowly. "What did Mr. Bell tell you?" Silence. Then my father said through clenched teeth, "He said we need to discuss the house." I almost smiled. Need to discuss the house. The most careful sentence possible for a man who had just discovered he might have gambled away his own living room. At that exact moment, there was a pounding at the front door. Not my father, not family. County emergency workers doing welfare checks on the evacuated road. And for the first time since the cars pulled away the night before, I realized I was not the trapped one anymore. I muted my father mid-sentence and opened the front door. 2 county emergency workers stood on the porch in bright rain gear, one holding a clipboard under a plastic sleeve, the other scanning the property line like he was checking for structural damage. Behind them, the road was half water and half broken branches. The whole world looked peeled open. "Rachel Conway?" the older one asked. "Yes. We're doing post-band welfare checks. We saw the plywood and the post. Are you injured?" I almost laughed from sheer exhaustion, not because it was funny, because nobody in my family had asked me that yet. "No," I said, shaken, not injured. He looked over my shoulder at the kitchen window, the towels, the animals, the lantern, the lockbox, and papers still spread over the table. Then he said, "Do you have somewhere else to go?" That was when I understood the answer had changed overnight. "Yes," I said, "eventually." I gave them water, let them document the property, and one of them quietly suggested I save every photo twice. The older one also asked, before leaving, whether the person who left me there had legal authority over the house. I looked at my grandmother's letter in my hand. "No," I said. "I don't think he did." By 8:15, Mr. Bell was at the house, not inside. He met me on the porch because he said very gently that it was better if the first conversation happened with the front door open and witnesses nearby. He had a leather file case and the face of a man who was no longer surprised by ugly family behavior, only disappointed by its timing. He read Grandma's letter himself, checked the deed copy, reviewed the occupancy clause, then looked at the plywood over the kitchen window and the exterior latch my father had used. "Rachel," he said, "I need you to understand this clearly. Your father didn't just behave cruelly. He created a recordable event under the exact language your grandmother was worried about." I sat down on the porch step because my knees suddenly did not feel trustworthy. "What happens now?" He opened his file case. "Now," he said, "we terminate their occupancy rights." Just like that. No courtroom speech, no dramatic gavel, no waiting for my father to discover morality in hindsight. A signature packet, a formal notice, emergency filing language because of the storm event, and documented confinement. I signed where he pointed. My name looked steadier on legal paper than it had any right to after a night like that. My father arrived at 10:02. Of course he did, not alone either. My mother in the passenger seat, pale and swollen-eyed, Jenna in the back, Mark in his own truck behind them. They got out acting like speed itself might still control the outcome. Dad started talking before the car door fully shut. "Take it down." Mr. Bell didn't even turn around. "Good morning, Tom." That stopped him. My father knew exactly who he was, the same attorney he had spent years dismissing as your grandmother's paranoia in loafers. Dad looked from the file case to the porch step, to the papers in my hand, and understood enough to go quiet the way men do when the room they thought they owned starts using words they can't bully. Mom tried first, tears already ready. "Rachel, honey, we were scared for you." I stared at her. Not because I wanted to punish her, because I had finally run out of alternate interpretations. "You left." She started crying harder. "Your father thought—" "I know exactly what he thought." Mr. Bell stepped in then, calm as rain after damage. "Thomas Sharon, I'm here to serve notice that your right to occupy this property has been terminated under the event clause established by Eleanor Conway and recorded in the life use instrument. Your conduct during the evacuation created endangerment within the property and triggered immediate revocation." My father actually laughed. A harsh, unbelievable sound. "You think you can throw us out of our own house over one storm?" Mr. Bell handed him the notice. "No," he said. "Rachel can." There are moments when the truth enters a family so cleanly it sounds unnatural. That was one of them. Jenna went white. Mark muttered, "Jesus." My mother grabbed the notice with both hands and read the first page, then the second, then looked at me like I had become somebody she should have studied earlier. Dad crumpled his copy halfway through the second paragraph. "This is insanity," he said. "This is because she got embarrassed online." I stood up. "No," I said. "This is because you locked me in a hurricane inside a house that was never yours to use that way." He stepped toward me then. Old reflex, old posture, old assumption that volume could still make me smaller. The county worker by the truck door moved before I had to. Not aggressively, just enough. And for the first time in my life, my father had to stop because another man in the space did not care about his version of authority. By noon, they were packing. Not everything. The notice gave them a short window under supervision to remove personal belongings, and Mr. Bell arranged for the sheriff's office to oversee if needed. But the power had shifted so completely, so fast that even my mother understood resistance would only make the record uglier. She found me in the hall once while Jenna was carrying boxes. "I should have stayed," she whispered. I looked at her and thought about every year she had spent translating my father's cruelty into family language, every time she had asked me to understand instead of asking him to stop. "Yes," I said, "you should have." That was the only answer she got. My father never apologized. He threatened. He paced. He cursed Mr. Bell, the internet, the church people, the weather, me. But apologies require a person to admit the world did not betray him first, and he was never built for that. Mark moved out with him 3 weeks later. Jenna stayed in contact with Mom but stopped speaking to Dad entirely after she saw the videos and read Grandma's letter twice. Funny how a locked window and one sentence from a dead woman could succeed where years of family dinners had failed. And me? I kept the house. I repaired the upstairs window, replaced the gutter, painted the kitchen where the lantern had burned a black mark into the counter, and left the plywood in the garage for a year because I wanted to remember exactly what finally ended the arrangement. People ask if I felt guilty. A little, at first. Useful daughters always do. But guilt faded when peace got loud enough. No one assigning me storms because I was good in a crisis. No one using my steadiness as a reason to hand me more danger. No one locking me into roles I never chose and calling it love. My father's first text that morning had said, "Please stop." He was too late. I already had. "Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. If that had happened to you, would you have posted the proof in the middle of the storm or waited until morning? And after finding out the house was yours all along, would you have removed your parents too or given them one more chance? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to see you in the next one.